Greetings to those of you who may have joined us. We're just going to give a couple more minutes to let a few other people filter in, and then we'll get started. All right, I think we've hit double digits, so we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to Applying as Your Authentic Self, a 2024 Road to Residency, Resiliency 2, hopefully. This is part of the Tour for Diversity. My name is Joel Moll, and I'll be moderating our esteemed panel. My pronouns are he, him, identify as a gay man. In medicine and emergency medicine physician, vice chair of education at Virginia Commonwealth University, and a former residency program director. So I want to make sure I sincerely thank everyone involved with the 2024 Road to Residency program and also the Tour for Diversity, and to make special thank you to Cameron Mathis and also Love Anani, who really helped put this session together. And with that, I'm going to ask each member of our panel to briefly introduce themselves and maybe a brief synopsis of their journey that kind of led them to where they are today. All right, and somebody just feel free to jump in.
I'm happy to go first. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
My name's Elaine. I use she, her pronouns. I am a brand new social emergency medicine fellow at Stanford. Um, I did my residency training in emergency medicine at UCSF, and that's where I met Dr. Moll at one of our conferences when I was a resident, and he's now one of my mentors. And I did med school at UCSF as well. And most of my academic work and interests outside of emergency medicine are in LGBTQ health, and I identify as a queer woman. So I'm super excited to be here and happy to meet you all.
Awesome. Welcome, Liz or Carlos.
Hey. Good. Carlos, good.
I'm Carlos Plancarte. I'm a pediatric hospitalist. I'm just about to start my new position here at Columbia University here in New York City. But previously, I grew up in Texas and documented, went to medical school in Texas, went to residency in Louisiana, did fellowship in New York City, then went to Vanderbilt for faculty, and now I'm here back in New York City. I go by the pronouns he, him, and I identify as a gay man.
Awesome. Liz?
Hi, everybody. I'm Liz Bonachea, she, her. I'm originally from Miami, Florida, and I did my undergrad and my med school at University of Florida, go Gators. And then I thought I was coming to Ohio for about 5 seconds for my pediatric residency, and then I never left. I am a neonatologist. I am the hospital's vice chair for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I am a program director, so fellowship director and super fellowship director. So I've been out of training for about 15 years. I identify as a queer Latina, and I'm very excited to be able to share some of my story with y'all.
Awesome. And, hopefully we'll have a lot of interaction. You'll have to use the chat in order to kind of pose questions to the group for those of you who are here. But just to get things start off, I wanted to maybe start and go kind of one at a time a little bit, just to have everybody, we talked briefly about that, but I think a lot of what in this setting it makes people anxious, or how do you exactly be that true and authentic self, and what was your journey and your pathway? So if you could just kind of briefly kind of go over how you balance some of this consideration with maybe multiple identities, and as you went into residency. I'm PGY 430 something at this point, so I can tell you I was not out, and for it's a very different time. It's during the middle of the AIDS crisis that I trained and came to AIDS, so to speak. So everybody has different journeys. So Liz, if you're comfortable sharing, I really appreciate you sharing for everyone's benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I graduated medical school in 2008. So just to kind of put that in context of the era, people weren't talking about being out in medicine very much. When I interviewed, there were no like out faculty talking about, oh, come here, and this is what the environment is like. There was one out third-year resident that wasn't discussed in the interview process, but when I came, I talked about my partner, I brought my partner. And while there were risks involved in that, I think my position in the process was I would rather know what I'm up against, right? And if this is a program that doesn't like me for who I am, then I'm probably not going to have a good training experience there. And again, that's risky, but to me, I would rather put that energy out and see if this is going to be an environment that's toxic or one that's going to be accepting. And there was really no pushback at all. I'm struggling to remember those days pre-residency, but I think it was like, I would say sort of a moderately out position. Like I would talk about my partner, but I didn't necessarily use terms like my wife. And it wasn't something that I necessarily volunteered super freely. But if it came up in conversation, then I didn't really dance away from it. And, there's a lot of microaggressions, particularly in that area. I wore a wedding ring. So like, what does your husband do is a very common question. So in the last 15 years, it has been amazing to see the change. So where I am, Columbus, Ohio is a really popular LGBTQ area within a red state. But when I trained, there were no out faculty, and now there's an out APD of the residency, and I'm out as a GME and hospital leader, and there are a lot of trainees who are really actively working to make it an inviting environment for the medical students and the residents. So that's been beautiful to see, and kind of a cool feature of having stayed exactly where I trained to watch how much it's evolved over time.
Nice. I was there before you. I went to medical school at Ohio State years ago. So
Oh, I think they call it the Ohio State.
I refuse to, because I went to Michigan for undergrad, just saying I'm a Wolverine. All right, Carlos, before I get in trouble, you want to share your journey a little bit?
Yeah, so I graduated medical school in 2011, so it wasn't that much different from 2008. It was still kind of up and coming, but I think one of the nice things for our specialty, at least in pediatrics, is that most programs are, I would say most if not all, are pretty open and accepting. For me, I also just, I didn't hide it. I didn't put it in the forefront. If people asked, I told them about it, and mostly because I didn't want to be in a program where I wasn't going to feel supported. And so I wanted to just be able to let them know who I was. And if they wanted me in their program, then they would rank me accordingly, And so since then, since I've, done residency, done training, I think things have changed quite a bit, at least in the field of pediatrics. There's a lot about faculty, even when I was at Vanderbilt and even when I was doing fellowship. And so I think things are, at least for the pediatric standpoint, things are moving in the right direction. I did do my residency in a religious affiliated institution, and I will say there were some issues that I would like to know beforehand, just because the program itself was very supportive, but the hospital system wasn't as supportive. And so that's just something to keep in mind if you're applying for residency and your hospital has a strong religious affiliation. Okay, thanks.
Interesting. I mean, often all politics are local. I mean, I've been surprised at some places I've been that the institution has one type of reputation, and the department definitely is different, and vice versa. Elaine, what was your experience?
My experience, I think I've been pretty fortunate to have mainly gone to school and trained in pretty liberal cities. I've been in San Francisco and the Bay Area for almost 9 years now. I did my undergrad on the East Coast in a pretty liberal place too. So I'll just admit I have a lot of privilege in that respect. I think, I've been out on my applications and professionally since I think applying to medical school. I wasn't quite out when I applied to college. And part of that was because I developed a very strong interest in LGBT health work. And if you just look at the resumes and the CVs, I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, you can kind of read me like a book. Everyone will make the assumption and they'll be right. So I might as well own it and just take the risk and see how people treat me. And I think more so for residency than medical school, I became more picky with things like geographic location, and the politics of the place, and partly because I personally like consider things like my family as well, and like how I'll be treated for other things that people read me more for, which is my race, more so than my sexual identity. And I think over time it just gets really tiring to accumulate all the microaggressions, as many people probably know. So when it came time to apply to residency, I felt like I wanted to look for a program that was in a place that I felt like I'd be comfortable living, and at an institution that was queer friendly. That said, at every institution, including like UCSF, where I was for a while, there are always going to be microaggressions, and like all kinds of people go to train everywhere. So we can chat about that later too. But I still feel very fortunate, because I think I would have had a very different experience living in another part of the US, for example.
And you know, obviously, you know, Elaine, you've been more recent in your journey, you know, through the whole residency application process than the rest of us, and certainly me. But, you know, I'm just kind of curious, everybody here on this panel has likely had people come to them recently, especially with some of the recent, you know, division in our society, talking about, I mean, I personally, as a former program director and somebody who still advises heavily medical students, had people that, you know, will go back in the closet because they're just kind of afraid knowing what kind of reception they're going to get. And I'm just kind of curious if everyone has had those conversations and kind of what your advice has been, because obviously individual advice can be a little different than some of the decisions we make for ourselves.
Yeah, totally. And um, I guess my experience aside, like when I talk to current students who are applying to residency or even medical school, part of it is kind of like looking at the whole picture. So um, some people will, like, based on your whole application, they probably have more ability to choose like how many programs to apply to, where they can apply to than others. So I feel like people who are in a place where, like, you know, say you have a much stronger application and you feel more confident about your chances, you can probably be more selective about, like, okay, I'm only going to apply to places, like I only want to live in certain cities, and I don't want to live in, I don't know, the South, or like states where they're having more legislation that's like anti-LGBTQ. But for most people, I think we we want to get in somewhere. You want to be able to train and become like whatever type of doctor you want to become. And so there's going to be some harder choices, and like it's going to be a risk, like, oh, what if, you know, I out myself and then I don't get an interview, and I'll never know because they won't tell you that feedback. And it's probably like, you know, an illegal thing for them. But usually I'll kind of sit down with someone and see, you know, what's realistic, and also like how central is your LGBTQ identity to you or other identities. And how comfortable people are being out. Because for some people, you know, maybe they're not typically out and they're fine with it. Or for other people, they've been out for a while and it would feel really terrible to have to go back in the closet. So it's not really like a great answer to your question, but I think the realistic part is like, then you have to like take into account, like, oh, how did you do on like STEP, and how did you do on your clerkships, and how much leeway is there in that sense. But I can only speak for emergency medicine, but I also feel like, at least like from the time when I applied and even now, like it's only been a couple years, but I've heard students say like, oh, more and more programs are starting to at least like put LGBT on their like diversity page, even places they didn't expect, which is even that sign can be really encouraging. And so
It's interesting.
it's a
There's
lot of.
actually an upcoming paper coming out about that, but
Oh,
I'll just,
nice. Okay. Hopefully it says good things.
it shows like many things we have work to do. But so Carlos, I'm
Yeah.
sorry to catch up, Helene, but Carlos, in your experience, just curious, and then Liz, I'm saving you for last since you're in a red state, because that may or may not um, color that, I guess.
Yeah, so I did I mean I did residency in Louisiana and Baton Rouge, so I definitely had uh a varied experience. It's I will say, like, as a, minority and gay person, living in a red state is really hard, to be honest. I mean, I just came from living in Nashville, Tennessee, and Nashville's obviously a very liberal city, but even then it was just hard. You have a lot of things stacked against you. That being said, like, one of the things that I enjoy the most about living in the South is that um, you can really be an advocate for your patients there, and those families, and you can help. For me, it's pediatrics, so I can help, guide parents that have questions. That's where you see a lot of the worst health disparities. So if you're interested in research, that's, some of the areas that you can, or spaces that you can work in. Now, in regards to whether um, I recommend, like, going back in the closet, I would personally say no, but that's just my opinion. Just because if you have to go back into the closet to fit in a program, then you're probably not going to be happy. And we all remember what it was like being in the closet, having to avoid questions, be evasive, and you're already, like, working a lot of hours, doing a lot in residency, and then to have that on top of that, like, I think if the program, if it's really that big of an issue for a program, then it's probably not the program you want to be at anyways.
Liz, and you obviously have a role in GME as well. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I have been on resident ranking committees. I run my own program. I support all of the fellowship directors. So I see this from a lot of different angles and have a lot of mentees. So the first thing I'll tell you is you don't owe anyone anything, right? You don't owe anyone any disclosures. You don't have to fit anyone else's opinion of how you should be out, not out. This is your own individual decision. And you should be supported by your mentors, your sponsors, your family, no matter what you pick. So that's the first thing I'll tell you. The other thing you don't owe anybody is to be an ambassador, right? Like, you don't have to go to the red states and be the person who fights against the healthcare disparities and be the advocate for defeating anti-LGBTQ legislation. If you love that, then, like, I am here to support you 100%. But also, like, you don't owe anyone that. Residency is hard, and I'm sorry to, like, be a Debbie Downer, but, like, residency, a lot of it sucks. Just to be fully transparent, it's really hard. And when you are a minoritized person, you have that extra layer and that extra burden. All right. So I want all of the residents to be thriving and not just surviving from day to day. And sometimes that means you need to pick and choose the places you're willing to be to try to reduce that burden as much as possible. And while I would love every single one of you to come train in Columbus, Ohio, I get that, like, that might not be the best place for you in this present situation. Maybe come around later as a faculty member. But I think those are just some things to take home. And when you're doing your introspection, just understand that there is no right answer except the one that feels right to you right now.
Well, jumping off of that, one of the interesting things is that I've been asked countless times, and, is how do you look at a program and know that they're welcoming, whether they're in a red state, a purple state, a blue state, whatever, and try not to talk divisiveness by that aspect. But I mean, how do you know a program? I mean, how can, I mean, Elaine mentioned looking at websites and things like that. So, I mean, that may or may not be helpful. And I think when residency interviews were in person, and Elaine, I don't know if you were in person, you might have been the first group of cohort, but I mean, you could kind of, talk to some people on the side and get some information. I think it's a lot harder to do that in the virtual world that we are in now. So does anybody have any suggestions of how to kind of figure it out? Because I think it's unfair to consider a program as not being, tolerant and accepting and welcoming, and that you could belong there just because it may happen to be in a red state, or it's probably inaccurate to assume that it's going to be welcoming of you if it's in a blue state.
I think the gold standard is, like, find somebody at that program and talk to them, or who's been to that program and talk to them. That's the best case scenario, is like getting actual input from people who've been in that environment, and they're going to give you hopefully a very honest take on what's going on. You can look for signals. They might be just performative, or they might be real indicators of how people care. So looking through the webpage, looking through the socials, looking through the folks that are in leadership positions, and what can you glean out of their bios, what kind of work are these folks doing that are running the residency programs. And again, what public persona have they made information available to? There are some institutions who use something called an out list. So it's a publicly available directory of folks at the institution that have identified themselves as LGBTQ and are willing to be contacted. But just understand that there are going to be places where the residency and the institution are incredibly supportive, but they are facing a legislative climate where things are going to have to be worded a little differently. You can't say diversity, or you can't say underrepresented in medicine. That doesn't mean that anything about the philosophy has changed, but these programs are flexing to sort of meet this new legal landscape.
To that point, how many people have out lists? I know we have one at VCU. Do you have one in Columbus?
We have one internally.
Okay.
Like we have sort of internal repositories of folks that have been willing to identify under any number of identities.
Not a public facing.
membership.
Okay.
But it's not public facing, correct?
Carlos, do y'all have one?
At Vanderbilt, we had an LGBT group within the pediatrics department that we would meet either like every 2 months or every 3 months, whether it was just having dinner or reading a book or just hanging out. And so I'm not sure if it's on the website or not, to be honest with you. But I know we, at least talking about what you said earlier, red states and that doesn't mean these programs aren't supportive. Vanderbilt, from an LGBTQ standpoint, is incredibly supportive. And so there was a lot of residents there, even though we were in Tennessee, and faculty as well. I don't know, with this new place that with Columbia, I'm starting on the first, so we'll see when I start how I find it. But I know Vanderbilt did have that group.
Nice. I'm glad there's certainly support groups at both places. Elaine, I mean, you're in San Francisco. I gotta believe you guys had an out list.
Yeah, we did for the institution.
All right. Any other wisdom, Carlos, Elaine, as far as trying to identify, in addition to what Liza said, as far as identifying what's the secret code, what's the secret handshake, whatever it is? I mean, I hate to say that, that's a really bad joke, but you know, how did you, when you're looking at a program, I mean, because I want to make sure that people fairly look at opportunities for them and not limit themselves just because of an aspect of who they are.
Yeah, so sometimes
sorry, go ahead.
Sometimes some programs would ask you like, hey, is there any specific interest that you have, or any specific person that you would, or departmental person that you want to interview with? And so a lot of times for me, I would say somebody within like the office of DEI, and I could ask them some of those questions as well. But I think, you know, the people that hold positions at these institutions from a DEI space, I think they're here to give you an honest assessment of their program and answer your questions. So I think even as an applicant, if you email them asking questions about, you know, the culture there, I think they would more than likely give you an honest answer.
Okay. Elaine, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I really agree with talking to residents at programs and like hopping on the phone to get their honest answers. And some places will hold like general info sessions, or even like diversity or DEI sessions that I would encourage you to attend and see what they present as DEI and how they do it.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we've, you know, at our shop for emergency medicine at VCU, we do a series in January where there are kind of like, you know, different groups, and you know, we call it belonging at VCU, and so it really is, you know, one night is if you're underrepresented in medicine, more traditional definitions. Another night is LGBTQ plus. Another night is families. Another is, you know, women, you know, that I think helps a little bit, but you know, again, it's, you know, people can draw conclusions that are probably not necessarily good, bad, or indifferent, but at least it helps people to ask some questions potentially. Anybody in the chat, please feel free to drop questions. We're just kind of going over some prepared questions, but I am happy to interrupt at any time if there's somebody with a burning question.
Looks like we have something in the Q&A. It says, any advice for those who are planning on using residency as their time to come out?
That's strange. I'm not seeing that. You must have a special
That's in
secret.
the Q&A. I have the secret tab. So
Oh, maybe so. Maybe so. I'm looking at the
Um,
chat, so maybe I'm looking in the wrong spot. Oh, here we go. Now I see that.
And feel free to elaborate if you mean like the experience of just coming out as a new trainee, or if you're talking about in the application process, this is the first time you're disclosing to sort of like a professional environment, this identity. I guess my general advice goes back to this idea that I think everybody listening probably knows that coming out is not like a one-time thing, right? This is a process that occurs iteratively for your entire life at the post office, at the grocery store, over and over and over again. So being out in residency can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different stages. So you could be really vocal, you could have pronoun pins, you could, kind of go out of your way to identify yourself publicly, or you could just be open and honest when people have questions or when topics come out and you're not really shying away from sharing details of your personal life like any other colleague would appropriately talk about their families and things like that. If you're talking about sort of the experience of coming out, I just come back to this idea that residency can be very overwhelming in general. So give yourself grace, right? That, you're doing a lot, you're learning a lot, you're growing in a lot of different ways. And you will never hear me talk about things more for new residents than like great mental health care and self-care. So again, take really good care of yourself if this is an entirely new phase of both your professional and your personal life. And make sure that you have some people you can trust to vent to and bounce things off of.
Anybody else have additional thoughts on that, or maybe experiences? I know for myself, I guess I didn't so much come out to my family, but I came out to more friends and stuff like that in residency, and I, lived more of my authentic life in there. And granted, this was again a bit ago, but because I was physically distanced, I went to another area of the country, and so I figured it just felt safer. But always, as a resident, you're an employee, so that was always a concern, right? Whether you have the same kind of protections that you might as a medical student. So I don't know, Carlos, Elaine, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I personally came out when I transitioned into medical school. For me, I found it really helpful just because it was just overwhelming to have the discussion with people that already knew me for a long time. I mean, eventually I did. Again, how we talked about coming out is a process that keeps on happening, and eventually I did, but I just found like starting with a new environment with people that I'm just meeting, I could really just reinvent myself and be truly who I wanted to be and who I am. So I found it, although I didn't do it in residency, I did do it when I started medical school, and so I found the new environment really helpful for my journey.
Because I
Elaine,
have
any thoughts?
kind of like the same. Sorry, I felt more comfortable coming out professionally than personally initially for kind of the same reasons. Like in medicine, I feel like our timeline is like 4 years at a time for a while. So it's like, okay, it's time for new me, and now time to be the real me. Um, but I think the one thing I didn't quite anticipate, this was more for med school applications, maybe because of it being more distant in the past, but um, I had like some uncomfortable questions in during some of my interviews where I think because it was the first time I came out in my personal statement, I didn't expect some interviewers to ask more about like, oh, like, so what was it like coming out to your family? And at the time when I applied to med school, I wasn't out to my family. So I actually did not know how to answer that question. I was just kind of like really scared, and I don't think I answered it well. I kind of blacked out. And that didn't happen for residency interviews. Thankfully, like didn't have any uncomfortable interactions there. But I'd say like if you're coming out for the first time on your application, just be prepared that some people might ask you slightly more invasive questions. Even though I think interviewers are supposed to be trained to not do those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's probably
Yeah,
worth saying like there's a bunch of off limits questions. So like they can't ask you about identities, they can't ask you about your family, if you're gonna have kids, you're married, anything like that. But they absolutely come up 100% of the time. So every
well,
mentee that I work with and we do mock interviews, we talk about like what are some things that might be points of discomfort. And if they ask you this off limits question, like how are you going to respond to that? We sort of practice what we call the dodge, right? Like the polite dodge of this question that should not have been asked, but now we're going to think about it ahead of time because it is really overwhelming to be in the middle of the interview and it feels very high stakes. And you're like, I did not need to be, triggered by this issue that just came up.
Having said that, I will say, again, there are definite rules, right? The program's going to get in trouble if they ask questions. And I think sometimes people get away with it a little bit. And that's for anybody, regardless of their identity. They'll ask some questions. I mean, we had somebody we interviewed years ago that came in and I cringed because I overheard a faculty member were like, "Oh, you go to a religious medical school. Are you that religion?" I'm like, "Oh my God, please stop." I'm like, we're going to be in so trouble. But anyway, long and short of it is, so anything you put in your personal statement, those things that you disclose to them is, however, fair game. Yes, they should not ask inappropriate questions about it, but if you say that as a meaningful experience for you, somebody may ask you about it. So just be prepared that you may get hopefully what's a polite question about it, but you nonetheless make it a question. All right, I wanted to pivot a little bit unless there's any additional questions. I'm not seeing them. Something that's really important, I think, as you go to residency, from medical school to residency is, be in a situation where you have mentorship, that help you kind of define who you want to be. And, I think a lot of times when you're, a minority, whether it's a gender or sexual minority or of any type, traditional set, sometimes, who's your mentors, who helps you, and is it necessary to have somebody who's a queer mentor? And, I'm just kind of curious if the panel could kind of just share a little bit about, who might be mentors that you found, how you found them, and, kind of what your thought of, is it necessary to have somebody who's also similar in as far as your either sexual or gender identity?
I think having intersectional minoritized backgrounds, like it's wonderful to have concordant mentors. Like there's something very unique about that. I'm sure you've experienced in this process working with organizations like Tour for Diversity, just somebody with a similar lived experience. It just resonates in its own special way. And it's terrific. Having said that, I have never, coming up had a concordant mentor, right? I think there are 2 or 3 people that are identifiable as queer, Latina, like full professors in medicine, like they just didn't exist, right? So I think you borrow from the richness of all the mentors that you have available and all the people who are invested in you. And those people might look like you and have similar backgrounds, or they might be absolutely nothing like you and still be incredibly valuable to your experience. But I think that's one of the things that's been really lovely for me and something I really wanted to commit to is paying it forward, right? So that other people can say like, hey, I did have a mentor who grew up like me, who had a similar experience than me, who shared this background. Because again, I think it's just special.
Nice. Carlos, thoughts?
Very similar to her. I didn't have anybody that was really concordant, but I did find a group of great mentors. They were all straight, but they helped me incredibly throughout my career, and that's why I've been able to get to where I'm at in life right now. And so I think finding mentors is really important to be able to be successful. Residency is a little bit hard to coordinate with a mentor just because you're so busy, but especially if you do fellowship and other trainings for your long-term career, is incredibly important. The way I found a lot of my good mentors is that I would ask either like my program director or my fellowship director or my division chief if they would help sponsor me to find a good mentor, since they're more familiar with the institution, and I would just tell them what my interests were, and they matched me up, and that's how I found some of the good mentors that helped me get ahead in my career. But I agree, it's incredibly important for you to be successful. Residency is important, but it becomes even more important the higher up you go in training.
Yeah, and I think that point about looking elsewhere is really important too, because, again, you may be in a department where you're the only obvious, or at least the only out queer person. And so sometimes, there's national organizations like in our emergency medicine, we have some diversity academies and things like that that try to set up people with virtual mentoring if it's not available at their home institution. So certainly that's an opportunity. Elaine.
I was super fortunate to find a mentor in medical school who was a queer woman and also also Asian. And I think the benefit of finding someone who had all those identities, which is pretty uncommon, was making me feel like, oh, I can belong or I can fit. And at the time, I was deciding if I wanted to go into emergency medicine, and I had a lot of like insecurities about like fitting in. So that was really helpful. And over time, I've learned, like you can collect mentors for all kinds of things, and there's no perfect one mentor that will just help you with everything in life. So there are certain people that I go to for certain things. Like I have research mentors, and I have more like life mentors, and there's like emergency medicine mentors and the non-EM mentors. So I like Carlos said, like there's like all kinds of people who have helped get me to where I am today, and some of the mentors I am so grateful for from college. I shared like almost no identities with, and I'm just so grateful they were looking out for me and offered me opportunities to get to the next step.
Yeah, I think that's a super important point. Mentor is a plural word, and it's important to think about, what somebody can offer you is sometimes different one person to the next, and you should certainly seek out as much mentorship and support because it helps you build your networks too, for sure. All right. I know we are scheduled, I believe, to go for an hour, but I know some people, depending on their situations and time schedules, want to make sure I get one important question in, and hopefully we'll have some others from the group. But, we talk about some of the things that are more negative, as far as, am I going to feel like I belong? How am I going to fit in? What's the reaction? How do I do those type of things? And I don't mean to say that they're negative. They're just life, right? Unfortunately, for our identities. I'd really like to be curious to hear from each of you, what you think being queer has added to your life, added to your career as medicine, and really made something that's a very positive thing about where you are. Right? And again, I know I'm asking you to share something very personal, and hopefully everyone will be, comfortable doing that, because I just think it's important to look at, there's a lot of positive about this too.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I have
I
kind
was
of
gonna say, I'm doing Brady Bunch, Liz. I'm gonna pick on you, but you.
no, it's fine. I'm an ICU person. I'm always willing to talk. So I definitely have a sort of public facing persona in medicine around being out and a member of the LGBTQ community. So I think it has really enriched my opportunities to mentor and sponsor other people and to bring the importance of belonging for the queer community into relief in medicine, that that is part of diversity, and we need to make sure that we have resources for folks. And that I think is one of my huge pet peeves, that we talk so much about recruiting a diverse workforce. Like we don't focus on belonging, which is what really, really matters, right? Like it's actually irresponsible to try to recruit a diverse workforce if you don't care about belonging. So I think it's been a huge part of my career. In neonatology, obviously I'm not, navigating the coming out process with my patients or anything like that. But I think it's been lovely to be able to interact with other queer families in the NICU and really understand where they're coming from, and then help our team really think about how to be inclusive for our families who have babies in the NICU. And just happen to be queer families. So I think those are all really positive parts, and just being able to be my authentic self makes me a better doctor, right? I'm bringing my whole self to work in a way that really just frees me to explore all the things that are really exciting about my career.
Awesome. Carlos?
Yeah, I think it's honestly, being out in general has really helped me with my mental health, and it's made me feel happier, be more productive at work, and overall move forward. I mean, I grew up with an LDS family, as how my parents are a religion, and so coming out was extremely difficult. But now that I look back, like I don't regret a minute of it, and if anything, I would have come out earlier. But I think it can add a lot of beneficial things to both your life and your career. And I think when you do, at least in pediatrics, when you do run into queer families and they know that, we share a community, there's just a lot more built-in trust, because and being able to provide that compassion and being able to provide them reassurance is really beneficial for me, my mental health, and I think for them as well, and trusting the healthcare system.
Lee?
I'm kind of echoing a lot of what has been said already. I think I didn't realize how, I guess, my mental health was negatively affected by not being out until I finally came out. I think I was kind of like, it felt like I was suppressing a big part of myself, not really being myself, but that manifested as probably more like depression early on when I was a kid. But I didn't know why at the time because I was still trying to figure it all out. And it's part of the reason why I developed an interest in LGBTQ health because it made such an impact on me to come out and find a queer community and finally feel like I had like a space where I could be myself and thrive. And honestly, I just love everything queer. So it's made me so much happier. And honestly, when I was a kid, I just didn't think I'd ever be that happy, which sounds so sad to say, but um, I'm just really grateful I have these identities, and it's really fulfilling to be in a career where I can mentor people who can come after me and share some of these identities, and also care for patients who, like in the emergency department, for example, so fast paced and everyone's going to make assumptions because everyone's moving so quickly. So it's nice to provide a safe space to be who you are and get care.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience. Is there a proper way to bring up a microaggression or some kind of concerns you have with your program director about your identity? Thoughts?
So I spend a lot of time talking to faculty and division chiefs about how to receive these concerns well. So I guess one message I would take home is that I think students currently, and then residents, then fellows, then faculty, are more and more aware of microaggressions, more aware of how to respond to them, to even identify that they've occurred in the first place, and to fairly quickly adapt your behavior to avoid committing the same microaggression twice, right? I'm not making excuses, but like when you have lived a pattern of behavior for a really long time, there has to be a period of unlearning, right? Realizing that something is not appropriate and then kind of breaking patterns and starting afresh. So we spend a lot of time on the faculty facing side to understand how to receive a concern. So the things that I would say as a student and then experiencing as a resident is think about who are safe people to bring your concerns to, right? And I hope that is everyone, but that may not actually be the case, right? So think about who's going to be a safe person. And there are people outside of the program that you can also bring concerns to. So if it feels too close or even involves the leadership of your program, remember that you always have the GME office, you have the DEI office, there's going to be folks available to you. Even if you want to bounce it to somebody completely outside of your institution to say, this is what I'm experiencing, can you help me think about how to navigate this within my program? There are people, and I would assume all of us are all going to be available to you to navigate this. I think thinking a little bit for yourself, what you are hoping out of bringing a concern can be helpful. Like there are situations where I just want some situational awareness. There are times where I want something to be done. And knowing that for myself is really helpful going into that conversation. Again, I hope that people who are receiving your concerns understand how to nuance that with you. And, sometimes what you just need is somebody to hear you because it sucks. Somebody needs to be able to say, like, that sucks. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Like, that was totally unfair. That should never have happened. Sometimes it's that person needs to be coached or managed, or I need to remove you from this situation because that's what you need to be successful in this moment. And I think a lot of times well-meaning people sort of make assumptions about what you need to feel authenticated, to feel validated in a situation where something has not gone well. And then whenever possible, being as proactive as you feel comfortable to make clear what support looks like is really, really helpful. So if you are trans, non-binary, you're coming into a program, you know, share your pronouns, share with your faculty to the extent you feel comfortable. You know, I'm going to get misgendered. It's going to happen. It may be by you, lovingly, it might happen. Here's how I want to try to navigate the situations. And I think particularly when you're in a fellowship and later on in your training, you get really close with your faculty. So you have a little bit more of that back and forth of understanding, okay, when this happens, this is how we're going to navigate it together. I want you to speak up for me, or I would prefer that you just let it go because I don't want more drama right now. And both of those are completely valid ways to address microaggressions.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to your point. I mean, microaggression occurs, you're not always in a situation that it's not your responsibility to address it and fix it, right? I mean, it may be in real time, it may not be in real time. There's also a lot of anonymous ways to report concerns and things like that if you don't really want to go and talk with somebody about it, just but to make sure that you get that addressed. But Carlos, your thoughts?
I echo what Liz said. I think just finding somebody who you feel is safe, either from a faculty standpoint or from a GME or another office that you can, express your concerns to, and then, yeah, trying to understand like what you need from that discussion to be able to be successful and move forward. And I think, microaggressions definitely happen, and I think there's lots of different ways to address them, and it'll just depend on the situation and the person that you tell and what you need out of them, and how they'll be able to help you out.
Okay. Elaine?
I was just thinking that that's a great question to ask residents on the interview trail, actually. Like, oh, how do you bring these things up and who do you talk to? Or you may get some responses that surprise you or kind of like yellow red flags.
That's a great tip. And I definitely recommend to use your question time almost like a weapon, right? Like you're going there with like a surgical strike with my questions, right? I'm not going to ask generalities like, tell me about your DEI mission. No, like come in there and say, can you talk about some examples of situations where trainees have brought up concerns about microaggressions and how were the situations managed? You know, where are the places in, fostering belonging that you think your program really needs to continue to invest some new energy? You know, where do you think you're succeeding and where do you think there's room for improvement? Like come with the serious questions that are important to your experience. Like don't ask about the call schedule. Like somebody will give you that information if you need it. But like really, really think about what's going to affect my day-to-day functioning and feeling of belonging in this program and how can I glean that with questions.
And to that point, I think those type of questions as a former residency and fellowship director really are well received. I mean, when you're asking specific things where you're really, as opposed to sometimes, these general questions that, you can read on a website in 2 seconds, they don't necessarily show your interest. They don't show your potential ability to commit. So don't be afraid to ask those questions. I think they're very positive. Similar, if you're afraid to ask that question, why would you want to train there? I would suggest, but anyway, Carlos, Elaine, other thoughts?
No, I agree. At least where I was working at Vanderbilt, they have like a second look for people underrepresented in medicine, and it's open. You just self-identify if you feel like you fit that mold, and so it's a virtual thing. And I think for at least that program, it was a great space to ask some of those questions and get those answers. But I think a lot of programs will have especially for applicants, will have a place for them to bring up those questions or concerns and get them addressed.
I think Carlos brings up a good point here that links back to your previous question. Is like, how do you look for these sort of signals of inclusivity and support and belonging in programs that sponsor something like that? I think that's a signal. It doesn't guarantee things are going to be awesome. It's a signal that somebody cared, that the trainees took time because they're committed to making sure that fostering a diverse and inclusive working environment is something that gets perpetuated as we're recruiting new residents. And yeah, residency directors love creative questions that actually get to like meaningful work. So like my favorite question ever, if you want a little pro tip, if somebody asked me if I had $1 million, how would I improve resident wellness? I'm like, that's a fabulous question, especially because I like to lecture about money stuff.
I'd be a little afraid about that question. That's just me from my days as program director. But anyway, actually, I've been asked that question before. So I don't know. Maybe it was one of your students who asked me that question back in the day. So, um, all right. As we kind of getting close to winding down, do we have any more questions from the audience? I want to make sure that you've heard. Now you have the opportunity. If not, maybe we could just kind of, toward the end here, just kind of take an opportunity to think about, what is it you wish you would have known when you were in the position of going to go in for residency and doing the application, since this is the road to residency, and any final advice you may have. Liz, we'll start with you again, carrying on the Brady Bunch tradition.
I wish I would have known that there were so many more of us out there. Like, it wasn't something that was talked about a lot, but as we sort of started peeling back some of those barriers to disclosure, I realized that so many people in our program were members of the LGBTQ community, were allies, and that there were a lot of resources that I guess I was so like narrowly focused on almost survival mode in residency that I didn't take advantage of. So, knowing that there's things like employee resource groups, as a resident, you're not going to like be pals with somebody who works in IS most of the time, right? Or somebody who, works in the gift shop. You're just not necessarily going to encounter all these folks, and there's opportunities to engage with them. Again, you're building your community and really take advantage of that. And then I'm so glad that y'all are coming up in this era of this national connectivity and, being on social and coming to webinars and getting to know folks all around the country is just going to increase that network for you so much. So I'm very excited for that for you.
I can go next.
All right, Carlos.
For me, I wish I would have known it. I guess you just have to realize what's really important to you. And for me, I wish I would have known like the city is really important to me. Like whenever you're applying, apart from the program, apart from, how good it is or if it's going to get you ahead, I think you're going to be working so much that when you do have time off and you have time to enjoy yourself, you want to be in a city that, at least for me, I wanted to be in a city that I felt really comfortable in. There was lots of things to do, and that there was decent LGBT community, just because that's usually the spaces that I would hang out at most of the time. And so just keeping that in mind, however long your residency is, it's going to be, how Liz said, it's going to be a little bit challenging, but if you're in a good environment where you can feel supported outside of work, I think it's really important. At least it was to me, looking back.
Elaine.
I wish I was brave enough to ask some of the questions Liz pointed out. I think I had this like fear that if I came across as challenging or trying to like find holes in programs, that it would do me a disservice. But now being on the other side, it really doesn't come off that way. I really appreciate when students and applicants ask us like the harder questions, like, oh, I noticed, your diversity is lacking X, Y, and Z. Why is that? And we can give a much more honest and thoughtful answer. And actually, I think it's much better to be honest and share, like, oh, maybe we don't have as much support once you get here for this, but we're working on it. Or like, oh, actually, maybe the website gave you the wrong impression, and there are all these things we have here. So don't be afraid to ask those things. And like everyone said, just remember, we want you here, you belong, even if there's bumps along the way, and even if certain people are not the kindest or the most accepting, please don't let that shake your resolve to be the kind of doctor you want to be.
And I think that's a great way to sum those things up. Unless I don't see any questions, maybe somebody just put something in the chat. This is one of the best panels we've had. Oh, awesome. Thank you all so much. And I will echo that as the moderator. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Elaine, for giving of yourself, giving of your time, and hopefully helping a tremendous number of people as they go through their mentors and networks and things like that. Because this is an angst-provoking time. We totally understand in general, let alone very specific extra thing when you identify as part of the queer community. But have faith. We all have made our pathways and our journeys and made a tremendous ability to have impact on others and help others have an easier time. So hopefully that's what tonight has done for you. So with that, again, my gratitude to everyone and good luck.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I'm pretty sure my email address is searchable on Google, so please reach out. You deserve all the great things coming to you. And if you need anything, let me know.
Yeah, thanks everybody. You can also reach out to me if you have any questions or anything comes up in the future.
Same.